what is faith? And I think, it's so much more than some mental assent to some set of beliefs. Is like it's something that has its way with us and pulls us into gives us the courage to enter into hell, right? And I actually think it takes some sort of willingness to die, which is what, I think of Jesus, like the example of like the way of the cross is like a willingness to lay down your life, or a liberation from our fear of death, which has held us in slavery all of our lives, is the thing that the Spirit liberates us to. It's like it liberates us so that we can face death, so that we can enter into hell. And then interestingly, I think like the work of, like, I just keep thinking of like, in Revelation, it says, I saw a lamb that looked as though he'd been slaughtered on the throne, right? The wounds of the lamb are eternal. Like heaven, let's say, isn't something that takes away your wounds, but the wounds are there eternally, but are converted into like a fountain of grace. So death is converted into life. Wounds are converted into fountains of grace, and hell is converted into heaven. This isn't like we go into hell so we can get you out over to this like suburb over here where it's safe and whatever. Is to say like we enter in and we stay. The wounds stay, we remain, and a little yeast works its way through the hole, and the kingdom emerges in hell. And this is like the gates of hell will not prevail. We enter in and we stay. And the work of God, I believe, is like a work of converting hell into home and pain into grace. And you were talking about like before, like community and accountability and all of these things in like a church
Hey,
service.
would you just be quiet for a minute?
Yeah.
That was just a moment. Dangler just gave us a moment.
I caught it.
Like we're gonna call that the Dangler moment, right?
Converting hell into home.
Like that was maybe one of the best descriptions of the gospel and the church I think I've ever heard. Hey, good morning. Good morning, Taylor.
I'm on my phone.
Good morning, John. We have to address something straight away here this morning.
All right.
Why Taylor and John oftentimes, especially when I'm talking, look down at their phones for like 20 minutes. It looks like completely, like right now, looking completely uninterested. And apparently what they're telling me is that they're taking notes. Like I got a notepad. It's what we used to do. We've been doing this for like, I think
I
for
also
like,
haven't. I'm old school.
not just
like you.
2,000 years of New Testament times till now. Old Testament, they were using the papyri.
Hey, in the comments, for the 9 of you that listen, I want all of you to say how many of you still write on actual paper, and then who takes notes on their phones or their iPads.
Well, we assume Taylor's answering emails and telling his wife how dumb we are on text message, but he swears.
But we're now gonna, because one of our
taking
internal
notes.
things is we always believe the best. So now we're gonna believe the best that you are actually writing notes.
Well, as you guys, I have assumed that as we've been talking, you guys are always taking notes because you've been toiling away and putting together this incredible book. And so I'm super excited about it. But yeah,
I'm
we're
leaving
taking
my
notes.
vest on because if I take it off and we're both wearing cream, that's gonna look like we had planned it.
What are we talking about, guys?
You know that you can't wear cream like after the age of like 50. This is probably good for you too, John.
Because you dribble on yourself.
Anything white, cream, light blue, it's just not slimming at all.
Oh, it's because of the weight thing.
Because you're slim, so you can wear white nicely.
This is good stuff. Our fashion episode is coming up in a few weeks. This week we're talking.
John is never in cream and always in black.
So one of the conversations we've been having a lot is about the gates of hell.
Just standard stuff we wake up talking about.
Yeah. So we decided, well, let's muse over this on camera. It's something that we've all talked about or written about at some point or another. But I've been a little fascinated about the history of this seminal moment that happened in Jesus's ministry. And I want to frame it in the way that I like to think it happened. As everybody knows, we read the story of Jesus or we hear the story of Jesus, and it's like, take your pick for how you want something to be interpreted. Peter walking on the water and then falling, or Jesus telling the people he's going to one side and he goes to the other, or the eat my flesh and drink my blood stuff, crazy stuff. But this particular story has really interested me for a long time now, and I think it'd be fun to talk about. So I'm going to frame it out, and then I just want us to go.
Love it.
Here's the geographical landscape of the moment.
Matthew 16, by the way, right?
Yep. Think so. I don't know.
It is.
It's definitely in the Bible.
Okay.
So Jesus is in this region with his disciples called Caesarea Philippi. And if you go to this region, there is a pretty significant landmark there called Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon has this super interesting history long before, thousands of years before this moment, when he turns to Peter. Everybody knows this story. He turns to Peter and he says, "Who do you say that I am?" And stay with us, because this is important. Why this unpacked it this way. So Mount Hermon, all the way back until the writings of this book called First Enoch, or the Book of Enoch, was known as the gates of hell, or was called the gates of hell by a lot of different cultures, generations, recorded in history. So it wasn't arbitrary that he stopped at this place. I'm going to give a little kind of kooky history too, because I do think it ties, and it's a BA moment for Jesus, of him saying, "Who do you say that I am?" There's this kind of church history or biblical history moment where all we know is these fallen angels, these kind of physical beings that had rebelled against God. We read about them in Job. We read about them in Genesis. We read about them in the Bible story, mostly
the Nephilim or whatever.
Well, the Nephilim were actually what theologians would call the offspring.
Okay.
From Genesis 6. So it says in Genesis 6 that these angels rebelled and they hooked up with women and they had kids.
Yeah.
We just taught our kids about this in Sunday school last week. Hang with us.
So Peter talks about it. The book of Jude talks about it. This isn't some random idea. I just want to say that. So if you think it is, do your research. You'll find out for yourself. But as the story goes, when they broke into our realm, when they rebelled against God, whatever happened, none of us know or understand. It was at Mount Hermon. That was what our friend Neil Cole would call the gate that they entered into. So here's the deal. This is what makes this so interesting. And there's two thoughts I want to wrestle with here. The second one is probably going to be more intriguing for us, but the first one is pretty dang cool. When Jesus stops at Mount Hermon, he's making like a celestial declaration that has been leading up for thousands and thousands of years. Because most dudes would say that these angels rebelled in order to stop the line of Christ. All right, you with me? Mm-hmm. So they wanted to stop Jesus from coming, because Jesus is coming, and his death and resurrection indicates what? It indicates his second return, which is when all of those that are against him are thrown into whatever, lake of fire, death, all that.
Game over.
Game over. So check it out. He's walking and he stops at the mountain, Mount Hermon, where this gate thing happened, where this rebellion happened. And a lot of people don't believe this. They interpret it differently. That's totally fine. But I think this is right. And I think this is a pretty baller moment. He says to Peter, right at the mountain, he turns and he says, "Who do you say that I am?" Peter says, "You are the Christ." And Jesus says, "Man didn't tell you this. God tells you this." The next thing he does is he goes up on top of this mountain and he transfigures. And then these, dudes come. We think it might be Moses and Elijah, but he's saying, "You didn't stop me. You couldn't win this battle. We're victorious. We won." So that's important, because it's important to recognize what the gates of hell are. It's not, in my opinion, it's not just this metaphor for, the gates of hell will not, okay. So that's idea one. Idea two, he says, "And on this rock, I will build my church." And John, try to kind of compartmentalize these, because I'd really like to hit on all of them, especially 2 and 3. He says, "On this rock, I will build my church." Now that's been interpreted a myriad of ways. The most accepted is the rock is Jesus. So on the declaration that he's the Son of God, I will build my church. A second really popular one is on Peter. Peter was the first pope. He was the first apostle.
That's the Catholic interpretation of that.
And sort of the apostolic in some ways, like but mostly the Catholic interpretation. But a third interpretation that's not talked about often, that seems to be, and hey, look, all three of them could be right. But the third one that seems to really be in line with the context is him saying, "On this rock, on Mount Hermon, at the gates of hell, that's where I want my church built. I want my church to actually go to hell and plant there." And then this is the third statement, and this one is wonderful. So then he says, "And the gates of hell," and we all know it as "shall not prevail against her," right? That's pretty much how every Westerner would quote that text.
Or will not overcome, or yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But again, what we're offering is that that's actually an incorrect delivery of what he was saying. It's not misleading, it's not bad, but it's an incorrect delivery. The word "against" is added. That's not even in the text. It was added because we wanted to make the word "prevail" make sense. But the better word there is "withstand." The better word is, "The gates of hell cannot withstand her. On this rock I will build my church, my people, and the gates of hell cannot withstand her." So the big part about that, and I think this is the energy and in some ways the engine behind the Brave City's dream, is we don't live on the defensive. To look at that moment in Jesus's life as the gates of hell cannot prevail against her, that puts us on the defensive.
Right, which is the posture of right now the evangelical American church, is we're losing, except for the far right. They would be trying to still go out and win, right? But that has been, when you think about most of the churches in America right now, they would go, "We're just trying to survive. We're trying to make it."
That's an important point. I want to say this about the far right comment. Even the idea, think of it like this, even the idea of "the gates of hell shall not prevail against her," that still fits in the far right ideology, because it's the idea of we will build walls to keep evil out.
Yeah.
Whereas what Jesus was saying was, the only wall is the gates of hell, and we're storming that thing.
Right. So it makes total sense if you keep reading the deal, because the only people that would have gates are those that are trying to defend, right? So clearly the enemy, evil, is actually on the defensive. Who else would have a gate? And then as you get to the end of this passage, Jesus is kind of giving us kind of like our marching orders that you will bind and you'll loosen things, like you'll get after it.
Well, and the idea of
if you're
setting,
behind your gate, you're not going to be binding or loosening anything. So, I don't know, it's one of those things where, and I think I even taught about this wrong in the tangible kingdom. Because in those days, I really thought we could build the kingdom, and, that Jesus was going to build his church on Peter, just a normal guy. I remember teaching about that. Jesus going, I'll build it on just normal people. But this makes far more sense when you take in the history all the way.
I do want to say before you go, John, because look, nuance is a wild thing. And we can say one thing, even us as ignorant humans, and mean three different things with it. I cannot know all that Jesus meant in that moment. I mean, the fact that Peter was there and his name means rock is pretty insane. The fact that Peter said a statement, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God, that is the, in a sense, the most essential statement of our faith.
Yeah.
That's pretty insane. So if someone said, hey, could he have meant all of our interpretations?
Totally.
I would go, yeah, definitely.
Totally.
But the one that is so in stream with the moment, this celestial, what do you call it? Like a freaking mental supernova.
Oh, it's a crescendo moment.
Yeah.
It's what everything's been leading up to. And it includes all the crazy story, all the demonic story that most of us just don't know what to do with, right?
We just kind of put it to the
Just
side.
put it aside. It's too crazy. This is like, no, this makes sense now.
So Peter stuff, all good. But I just think this needs to be included. And I think it needs to be heavily considered. And I think the reason we don't like to consider it, to be honest, is because it does what we're trying to do. It calls us out of comfort. It calls us out of ease, and it calls us out of our walls. We're Troy, right? Like, we just want to enjoy our life here, safe behind our walls, without letting any Trojan horses in. And this idea is calling us beyond those walls, more from the Troy life into the 300 life.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
Like as raiders, like I picture like Vikings or whatever, like storming gates or whatever. It's like it's calling us to be exactly that, on the offensive.
So if you're familiar with those stories, I was sharing with Lynn's, my wife, the other day, I was sharing, like, I feel like we've been trained to be Hector, or remind me the king in Troy. I know it. I can't remember. Whereas we were more called as Achilles, or King Leonidas with the Spartan army. Like, this is a direct mandate of these gates cannot withstand us. So when I'm not trying to get super extreme. I'm more saying, like, with Brave Cities, we're saying we go to hell and we architect kingdom ecosystems there. We find where the gates have been blown open, and that's where we begin to uncover the kingdom in those cities.
I don't know if Neil Cole would even be glad we mentioned this, but when he came out, he wanted, like, and we're just thinking, like, we just want time to pray, think about what we're doing here. And Neil's trying to literally find the gates.
Yeah.
And he said, we got to find the gates. And now it's making some sense.
It was,
he
was ahead of us.
And you think about, like, his apostolic gift and his apostolic understanding. When we did the Brave Cities thing, we actually said we're writing this to the 1%, to the apostolic leaders. You wouldn't generally just say this to the 99%, the ones that just want to be shepherded. This really only makes sense for the ones that would go, oh, okay, yeah, I'm already going in, or I have been in for a long time. Nobody will go with me. So this really is kind of an apostolic call. I wish it wasn't. I think about even a podcast thing I heard the other day where a very prominent American young pastor, cool dude, I know him, I like him, but he's, I don't know what his point was, but he was talking about why they need to be in church. It's thousands of people. He's trying to, I don't know if he's feeling pressure or whatever, but he's trying to get them to be in church. And he's talking about all the things that happen only in the church. And he's saying, this is where you get your true biblical identity. This is where you get your true accountability. This is where you get your true community. And I was thinking the whole time going, you don't get any of those that like in real time. You don't really get real accountability when you roll in with hundreds and thousands or even 50 people. You're probably not going to get that. You're not going to talk about what's going on.
Right.
You're not, you might get some identity.
Well,
we're God's people.
But it's almost like you can, just like you could if you joined the Rotary Club.
Totally.
But it's not that it's there, right?
Yeah. But I think about like when we have done what we're doing and we tend to find places that are pretty hellish, then you get all those things. Like you almost can't survive in hell without true accountability and true community and true sacrifice and true suffering. I mean, those things are, so like we got to talk about the church and where it goes, what it does. But yeah,
I'm writing notes.
Sure you are.
I'm not texting my wife about how dumb these guys are. John, man,
by the way, what's at Mount Hermon right now? If you go there, I was there probably 7-8 years ago. There's this killer shawarma shack where they do all the tours of this spot. Killer. And I just remember we took a billionaire with us from Denver. And everywhere we stopped in this hot van, we would have shawarma. And I remember my key Mount Hermon moment was this guy going, I don't want any more effing shawarma. That's okay. Anyway, trying to give you guys some time to think of something to say. John, what are you thinking right now?
Well, so I actually didn't have a lot of this historical context of that story. I mean, I have in recent time because we've been discussing it and I've looked into it quite a bit and it is super fascinating. But this passage, I guess I'm like, I don't know, happy about this, like now to go like, this is actually how I read this passage just in the kind of English rendition of it. And I think part of that is like an overall theological framing of the call of the people of God and like what it is, like the idea of like storming the gates just makes sense. So, and by the way, like, gates are either put up to keep people out or to keep people in, both of which makes sense in the context of hell. And then you think like Jesus saying like, I came, actually, this is interesting. So, we usually don't talk about like when we're recording because we're releasing these later, but time stamping this a little bit. We just entered into Lent and in the liturgical calendar, right? And Lent is, probably everyone knows, or most people listening know, like a period of time leading up to Easter, but a reflection on death, mortality, sin, guilt, pain, but which makes it like my most favorite of liturgical calendar seasons. But it is actually a reflection on those in the 40 days that Jesus spends kind of in the desert in the beginning, right before he begins his ministry or announces his ministry. And so he's baptized. And then when he's baptized, it says the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of God led him to the devil. Like, if you just read that, it's like, okay, that's interesting to me. That's always been like, I can't stop reflecting on like, where does the Spirit of God lead you? To hell, to the devil. This is the first move. And then he goes out where it's like, now he's formed in the desert, like he's in the desert, in the wilderness, in the dark, in pain, in temptation, wrestling with the devil. All right, so we could skip that whole scene. We know where he is. And then he returns. This is like the famous like Luke 4 announcement of his ministry. He comes back in. If you haven't eaten in 40 days, you've been in the desert, sweating it out. I imagine a very emaciated, disheveled looking man, looking very weak. And it says he comes with power. That's interesting in contrast, right? Comes in with power. He opens the scroll of Isaiah and then he reads, and this is that I was sent to bring good news to the poor, recovery of sight to the blind, to set captives free, to proclaim freedom. And this is like the announcement of the entire ministry. And it's the idea that you're going to go to where captives are to set them free. This entire intro story to me is a story of like, God called me to go to hell so that I can go to hell. Like, and I actually, let me just kind of extrapolate what I mean by that a little bit.
Take your time.
Each of you, everyone listening has probably, let's just say, been in hell emotionally, existentially, like you've been like in times of grief and pain and loss, depression. Like all of us kind of know the experience of like being like the lights go out, God feels dead. We're in the desert. St. John of the Cross called the dark night of the soul. Like we know these places, most of us. And when we're in a place of grief and doubt and despair, let's just say, have you ever had like another Christian come to you and try to encourage you? And often the words feel as hollow and trite, even painful, right, like even hurtful. Yeah. They mean well, right? Like bless their heart. But like these encouraging spirit, you know, God works all things together for the good, and like all of these things that this is it can be like painfully empty and even destructive when you're in that place. But I could tell you from my own experience in really dark places like that, and let's even say the same words of encouragement. I can remember like homeless friends that live in hell in very real ways, throwing their arm around me and giving me encouraging words. Let's say the exact same words. And light breaks into my darkness and like something is lifted, right? And when I reflect on that, I think, man, you know what the difference is? They've been in hell. Or
even more encouraging when you're in hell to just look across the room and wink at another person that's in hell with you.
Like, I'm here with you. That's exactly it. Like, I'm in hell. We're in hell. Exactly.
That's the most encouraging, honestly. Hey, by the way, going back to Luke 4, Isaiah 61, which is really the framing of the gospel, what we call the gospel. Yep. Those 9 redemptive deeds, the Hebrew verbiage on "he has sent me," it should apply the word "sent" to every one of those 9 redemptive deeds. So it's not just one, "he has sent me." So like when you really think about the church, it is constantly sent. If it stays put by its nature, it's now going to fortify up. And so it's, when I think about even the early missional movement, I mean, I feel like what we all did collectively was just try to get the word "sent" to be accepted within the existing church. Like we had to sell our sentness. They were like, "Oh, seriously? Are you like, we really," it's 20 years trying to get them to go, "Yeah, I guess that's in the text." But so what are we doing?
Well,
what are we doing?
It's so important that everything we say in these times, that we kind of leverage them for the understanding of what we're even, this isn't a theological course or some kind of biblical history moment. We're just, quick reminder for anybody who listens to this, we'll say this a lot, but the reason we call them the gray pages is because all this is gray to us. We're investigating. We've all 3 decided, and our communities, our families, we're just going to spend our lives kind of chipping away at the stone, if you will, to try to uncover what is the kingdom. Mm-hmm. But the reason this is important is because it is such a stark contrast of what we see everywhere. Western Christianity or Christendom, or even the gospel as we know it today, the good news is like, get away from evil and build for yourself a nice life. Jesus loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life.
4th place religious environment that you can go to get some encouragement from the rough week you're having.
Yeah. And then second is this life. We have little hints, guys. Like, why would this apostolic dude named Paul say, if this isn't true, everyone should pity me more than anyone else. There's got to be some kind of
Yeah, the pity wasn't
foundation.
like, well, I guess I've had a really screwball theology, so you should pity me. He's saying I should be pitied because of all that I put on the line for this thing.
Yeah.
I often say that when I'm driving and I'm having a moment of doubt, I'll like literally go, this better be worth it.
Yeah.
God, like it's better be worth it at the end of this thing.
Exactly.
So
Yeah. Like if this isn't real, man,
this is the craziest thing.
because
Well,
we're,
Yeah.
yeah.
We often say, like, if you're not suffering yourself, the one unique thing about the Christian movement or Christians in the world is that if we don't have it going on right now, we're the ones that should wake up in the morning and actually go try to find it
Yeah.
in other people. That's the only thing that makes us a unique people group. So Jesus is the firstborn among a new humanity. It's the new humanity of these people that literally wake up every day going, okay, where are the gates of hell? What are we doing? And it's not rocket science. So when we build out, in the Brave Cities ideology, when we say a kingdom ecosystem, we don't just go, we'll get a coffee shop because that'll be cool. And that'll, you'll meet some people and then go. It's like the stuff that God will lead you into. And some of it will feel cool and nice, but most of it will be something related to hell. And your boys are trying to get in, just play basketball. You're trying to figure out what type of basketball is in Alton. You realize there's nothing. And then you meet a guy that's also going through hell, but he's a great coach. And you just start thinking about it. And I think now you're on year 2. And I can think of 50 times you've talked to me about the hell that you were going through to try to get just a basketball league going for mostly fatherless kids. So I just go, it's like when you think about the practicality of the church going to hell, that's what that is. You go and you live and you start to realize there's things like even this morning, my son-in-law Matthew is going to take my granddaughter Mila to a daddy-daughter dance, which is so cool. It's kind of unique to this area. We didn't have them growing up. I don't know, maybe you're going to that.
I'm going.
But my initial thought, I told Cheryl, like, it just makes I'm more sad. Like, I think that's great, but I think about all these little girls that don't have dads in our town. And it makes me want to like call the school and go like, do you need some subs?
Well, so that's what it is. So I'm from Birmingham. We did a daddy-daughter dances in Birmingham. And this is practically how it fleshes out. This is what storming the gates of hell looks like.
Daddy-daughter dances.
Yeah.
No, check this out. So I went to a daddy-daughter dance. I didn't have a daughter at the time. This was 10 years ago. My oldest daughter is 9. And as I'm there, I think when you look at the mountain in this story, you start to see the entire world differently. You go to a town, one town over, and you walk into a sports facility, and you just can't help but look around and go, everybody here has a dad. Everybody here looks like me. There's nothing like this in my neighborhood where most of the kids don't have a dad. So I remember the day I walked into a daddy-daughter dance. I see what I see. I see the Matthews and the Taylors and their daughters. And I know I can tell the whole story. I know a place in Birmingham, Alabama called Macmillan Gardens. I think you've been there with me, John, where there are 20 girls without dads. Who's going to take them to a daddy-daughter dance? And I'm just overcome with it. Now, people could say, like, you always criticize, you always find problem. I don't think that's what it is. I think when you see the mountain,
Yeah, you're always sniffing out hell.
you always see hell. Wherever you go, even
Right.
when you see heaven, you see hell.
Yep.
So 3 years later, we started a daddy-daughter dance at our coffee shop in Birmingham, and we recruited sub-fathers
Boom.
who took young girls that they had relationships with and it wasn't a massive hit. None of it is. That's the thing. Nothing ever really works, right? Don't we always talk about this, John? Like we want to, what do you say? I'm going to put on my headstone. We tried.
Yeah. But I always like, I like this. I've twisted this like cliche quote, but if it's worth doing, it's worth doing poorly over and over and over and over. Until we
Right.
get
Like,
it out.
remember, King Leonidas was killed. That it didn't work.
That was true too, right? That movie had to be true. That was so
Let's
awesome.
let's just
Had to be.
let's just agree that it's true.
Don't tell me it wasn't true.
That's not the point. Isn't that they won? The point is that they stormed, and they lived their life, and that's why everyone is so inspired by that.
By the way, a couple moments from that movie that was true. You'll recognize it was titled by a number, 300.
Yep.
And that was a very small number. So like just on a practical level, when you think about storming the gates, I just don't think you can storm the gates real well with a lot of people. And it seems like God always does. That's why I think even the micro church movement is a better expression to set the church up for the gates of hell. Across the board. If you remember in that movie, there's a scene where the guys know they're eventually going to die. There's kind of a levity about being part of the 300. I think they were probably down to, maybe 90 at that point in the movie, but they're piling up bodies because they're still winning. They're winning the little battles. And they're just piling up bodies, kind of joking. But I do like the feel of that. I think when you even think about, like John, you and I were talking before, people will hear this and go, well, time out, but what about our church gatherings? Like, doesn't a Christian or the church mean, like God says, I'm going to build my church? Some will go, well, that word means the assembled ones. So doesn't that mean we should be in church? But nobody seems to ever ask, we bring this up a lot, well, where were they assembling? Like, does it have to be in a fourth place country club assembled setting, or could the assembled ones be in these small little active communities? I remember going to, we took a cruise around Italy and we stopped in Rome. We had a day, we got some electric bikes and we hired a tour guide. And so this guy in his Italian crappy English says, where do you want to go? And we said, first thing, can we find Paul's house? We know you can find it where the church in Rome started. Because eventually these suckers took over Rome. Took over the provinces. So we'd like to go take us to the first little house where he's probably writing to 30 to 70 people. And he's like,
he knew what you were talking about.
He knew, but he goes, no, you don't want to go there. He said, I take you to the basilicas, to the amphitheater. And we're like, no, I will go there, but take us to the little spot that changed the world first. And he didn't take us. So we fired him. But that seems to be the dichotomy. The church still wants the big.
And he didn't want to take you because it was this.
Yeah, he thought it was
goofy
insignificant. We explained to him the significance, and he didn't want to go. So he's done. But I feel like when we think about storming the gates, we really do have to think. We have so many people that probably, I think, look into our community here, and quite a few have asked if we do other things. They're talking about church service, and we say no. And so they end up not being a part of us. I think that tends to be the story with Brave Cities that we see around the country, is most of them are not thousands. Most of them would be pretty happy to have 300 all marching together. But if you're wondering about, well, how do we, I ain't got much. It's just me and a handful of friends. Like, how do we storm the gates? That's what we've talked about. That's how you do it. It's just small little ventures in the underworld, kind of get it done. You got to find friends that are committed to that, especially if you're planting a church. Man, if you can't find people that want to go to hell, you will. What you do with your first 6 people will be what you do with 60 people and what you do with 600. So if you can't find 6 that want to storm the gates, I'd say don't get off the pavement. Sniff around, pray 'em out of the cracks and crevices before you try to go public.
What you thinking, John? Your eyes are moving back and forth.
Well, I was thinking about, like, just trying to think of like someone listening who's like, what are we talking about? Hell. And, I think that it's very easy. Like, there's almost a psychological thing. We see hell all the time. Listeners, you see hell. And we just use like a guy on the corner as an example, or you're walking around downtown, like you'll see someone. I think an easy way to illustrate this is someone someone homeless, maybe mental illness, maybe laying on the concrete, whatever. And it's like, we see them and we see like that they're in hell. And actually the like natural reaction is to avert our eyes. And I actually think that that recoil in us is a recognition of hell, because we naturally do not want anything to do with hell. We don't want to have death and disease in our life. We don't want to have poverty and pain in our life. We don't want to have grief in our life. And even like, if you just watch us behaviorally, it's why we repress this stuff, ignore this stuff, act like this stuff's not going on internally with our, whether it's guilt and shame and memories and pain and all of this stuff, but we see it like, and I think that that might be a helpful, practical piece of advice to someone to say, like, when you recoil, or you walk in a room and you see, like, everywhere you go, you see like this thing you guys were describing, this condition where even in the mountain, you see hell, like wherever you go, you see hell. It's like, you can train your eye to see hell, but when you see it, the reality is, so to go back to this guy on the street, the reality is there's something in you that recoils and you want to run away from it. And it takes courage to lock eyes, to acknowledge, to enter into their hell, right? Their pain, their suffering, their whatever, to introduce yourself or whatever. And I think what I wanted to bring this up is to say, like, courage, I actually think is fairly, like, you guys were talking about these soldiers storming gates, is like, it takes courage to enter into hell. And I actually would say that courage is almost synonymous with faith. Like, the idea that what is faith? And I think, it's so much more than some mental assent to some set of beliefs. Is like, it's something that has its way with us and pulls us into, gives us the courage to enter into hell. Right. And I actually think it takes some sort of willingness to die, which is what, I think of Jesus, like the example of like the way of the cross is like a willingness to lay down your life, or a liberation from our fear of death, which has held us in slavery all of our lives, is the thing that the Spirit liberates us to. It's like, it liberates us so that we can face death, so that we can enter into hell. And then interestingly, I think like the work of, like, I just keep thinking of like, and in Revelation, it says, I saw a lamb that looked as though he'd been slaughtered on the throne, right? The wounds of the lamb are eternal. Like, heaven, let's say, isn't something that takes away your wounds, but the wounds are there eternally, but are converted into like a fountain of grace. So death is converted into life. Wounds are converted into fountains of grace, and hell is converted into heaven. This isn't like we go into hell so we can get you out over to this like suburb over here where it's safe and whatever. Is right. To say, like, we enter in and we stay. The wounds stay, we remain, and a little yeast works its way through the hole, and the kingdom emerges in hell. And this is like, the gates of hell will not prevail. We enter in and we stay. And the work of God, I believe, is like a work of converting hell into home and pain into grace. And you were talking about, like, before, like community and accountability and all of these things in like a church service.
Hey, would you just be quiet for a minute?
Yeah.
That was just a moment. Dangler just gave us a moment.
I caught it.
Like, we're going to call that the Dangler moment, right?
Converting hell into home.
Like that was maybe one of the best descriptions of the gospel in the church I think I've ever heard.
Wow.
But you might want to pull that out of your recording.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's the clip. You know what I kept while you were talking, I was getting so fired up. You remember the moment where Leonidas says, eat a hearty breakfast, men, for tonight we dine in hell.
Yes. I love that.
Well, that's what you just made me feel that. So let's storm no, I mean, converting hell into home, there's so much practical conversation around that I want people to be free to have. Like, do we how do we rest? How do we find healing? I mean, there's a big, I keep thinking during this conversation, the amount of especially younger people right now that are so, no pun intended, but so hell-bent on wholeness and healing. And I want to feel safe. I want a safe space. And I understand all that. I'm right at the front of the line sometimes of woe is me and this is hard. But man, I can't escape the reality of the life of Jesus and that idea that you just gave us of converting hell into home. It's just going to be painful. And where do we find solace and mirth and lightheartedness and levity? I think that's really the essence of the church. We find it in each other. We mourn together. We worship out of pain together. We worship out of small victories, whatever the small victories are. But I keep waiting on some of the truth of that Isaiah 61 idea. Like, when are the brokenhearted bound up? When are the breach places repaired and rebuilt? But I just think it's over generations, don't y'all? Like, I see it happening. We've all seen the dilapidated restored, but it's hard. It takes time and it takes a lot of pain.
I like this. I mean, even just personally, like we think about like how we feel leading and working and living inside these types of brave cities. Think about what you just said, John, that the gospel, wherever Christ is, there's freedom. Whole thing is about freedom. And you started to say that so we know we're free from sin and death.
Mm-hmm.
So free from the fear of death too. So that allows us to live differently. We had actually a guy beating up a woman the other day, and a couple people in our CrossFit gym were talking through what to do in that situation. And they were saying like, well, you don't get involved because you don't know if that guy is going to have a gun. So if you try to protect this woman, it's not worth. And one of the guys goes, it's just not worth, me not being a dad for my kids. And I kind of chimed in. I said, here's another way to think about it. Like at some point, hopefully early in your life, you decide what type of code of honor you want to live your life by. And it was normal for knights of the round, if you will, that were loving the king and his kingdom, that they would have codes of honor. One that stands the test of time throughout history is that you always protected women. And I said, I just always felt like it doesn't matter, who you're protecting. Apparently, after they sort of broke up the scene, the guy got in his car, came back around and picked up the woman that he was beating. And she goes, oh, I got to go. And they were trying to get her to not get in the car with him. And so I think that justified, well, it wasn't worth us stepping in that moment because she's all jacked up anyway. But I go, no, it doesn't matter, because if you have decided that your code of honor in your life is that you always protect women that are getting beat up, and you take a 9mm slug in the neck, and then your grandkids don't have grandpa and whatever, they were like, well, then what do you say to that? I said, well, again, it goes back to what are you trying to pass on to a community of people? We had a talk with our family a long time ago that the Halters will always jump in. Mm-hmm. And the benefit, even if we take the 9mm slug, is that story gets transferred down to our grandkids, who we would hope someday would want to take the slug too.
That's right.
And to me, that is, when you think about discipling your kids, it's got to be based on a code of the king and the kingdom. And if what we're saying is that a entrance level, a discipleship level, is that you always are moving towards a cruciform way of life. You're always dying to self. I've been crucified with Christ, so it's no longer I who live, and I don't need to live. I don't have to even fear death anymore. Then you're free from the striving for peace and tranquility. You're free from blaming people when the world's not working good. You're free from having to be chronically, what do you call that when you're just despondent? Like, Like when you just sort of lose any sense.
Downtrodden.
Yeah, you're just melancholy, like
Yes.
whatever. Yeah. So you go, I'm just not going to enter in. The world's too crappy. So what's the point? Jesus sets you free from that. So you just settle the issue. If I'm following Jesus and he's always going to hell, I'll always be in hell, and we'll settle it later. We'll dine in hell at some point, and he'll wink at us. He'll probably go, "Thank you."
And of course, the conclusion of the thought is that's where we begin the archaeology, artistry, and architecture of a kingdom ecosystem. We don't go to hell. We don't take the church to the gates of hell to just submit to hell. She can't withstand us.
Mm-hmm.
The gates of hell cannot withstand you. So build the kingdom here. Here's the thing in your story, which was a perfect metaphor. The great granddad who took the slug is usually only remembered by his family. His family is then inspired to fight for something bigger than just a code of honor. They begin to fight for the protection of women.
Yeah, Grandpa died protecting a prostitute.
Yeah, and then they establish something that protects all women, and then that fights for human trafficking, and then that forms an organization that goes into countries and rescues girls.
Yeah.
But it was because Granddad took the slug. And I think a lot of times, especially on the pioneer front edge of things, you're the granddad taking the slug. You're thought of as foolish.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you do this and put your children through this? When in fact, if you really watch the story for 3 generations, the grandchildren or great-grandchildren are now fighting something that is historic, and they're remembered, and they're thought of as heroes.
Yeah.
By the way, it does play out. I think if you study this, you got the original crew that took the slug. I think it was 3 generations and Rome was done. So I think it was a passing down of the story and it was hundreds of thousands of people that died for this story.
Yeah.
So it's as,
it
really is about that.
I'm glad you brought up the origin, because the early church, like when we read some of the writings of the early church, both like some of the early letters that we have in the New Testament, and even some of the just like later letters, those first few hundred years during persecutions and things like that, maybe after kind of the Bible text, there seems to be this weird. So just take something like sexuality, right? There's like this there's a real, God, this is a crude way to put this, but what comes to mind is they had a hard on for abstinence. Like there was a way in which it was like, there was like this, like, and so today we hear that and think there's this real, like, conservative purity ethic. But I think the reality of that is that there was something different going on. And I actually think of like when you, like Jesus and Paul both, for example, discouraged marriage, right? This is going to be tied to this, is going to come around, but like it was like, if you can not do it, it's better. And I don't think that was some like commentary on marriage. I think like, was you told that story, that guy going, it's not worth not being a father to my child.
Right.
The reality is it's a wartime ethic. Yeah. We are in the middle of a revolution.
Yeah.
And it is so much harder. Like that resonates with me. I don't have a kid, but I know that in every way I have civilian attachments, it is harder to risk my life.
But that was, keep going. But that was also, I'm everything I'm saying is right in line with what you're saying. It was a vulnerable human moment. I would say that now, and nothing is more valuable to me than my family. But if someone was like, man, I want to do what you're doing and this and this and this, but what about your wife and your kids? And I would go, oh, it's better to not be married, bro.
Well, no. And by the way, I've known so many kind of kingdom people that have moved to hell move their family and their kids into hell, like in geographically, like in the city or whatever, into like places of pain and violence and poverty and their middle class church friends, air quote Christians in their lives, have wagged a finger at them like, how dare you put your kids at risk? How dare you take them to the worst school in town versus the best school in town? How dare you and it's interesting because and to the point of like what Hugh was saying about like the passing down of from the grandfather that would take the slug, is like, is it better for my kids to see me surrender to the king, to live a kingdom life, to live out this code of honor, versus to protect them or hide them away from it, which I actually think is what we see so much in kind of what we have built and called churches, is away from life, away from this, a safe place where we are protected and away from these things, and merely like talk about them and assent like to some belief, and never really be pressed to embody it. Because I actually do think like parents, all parents, humans, like just like it's like I said before, like you flinch when you see hell and there's something natural in you that doesn't want to go there. Parents do not want their kids. I think a parent's physical, like forget like kingdom, a parent's job is to not let their kid follow Jesus. Like you don't want your kid going to hell. You don't want your kid risking their life. You don't want your kid being in a precarious situation. You don't want your kid like getting in a car with a stranger, to use like a cliche kind of like don't do. But like, totally. But that is the natural way of things. Like your job is to keep them from doing that. But then you called one, sent one, or you do have some civilian attachments. You do have a marriage and kids and whatever. And to the point of like, I think Hugh's story is like, we will always jump in the fray and I will go into hell. And my kids are best. Like that is a modeling of a parent who wants their kid to be actually discipled in the way of Jesus, which I think most people should wag their finger at and be like, why on earth would you want your kids to be like Jesus? That's crazy.
Okay. So here's the compromise. Number one, what we're saying is just start asking the question, where is hell?
Mm-hmm.
Number two, the invitation is into freedom, not pain.
Yeah.
Pain is the result of feeling the weight of evil that has oppressed so many for so long. It's the same way you feel when sickness comes over your family, like a severe sickness comes over your family. But you know that it draws you closer. It brings you to your knees. It brings you to kind of what you said earlier, John, like a wartime action. Like we're on the we have to what am I searching for right now? Like we're on the offense now. We've been living defensively for so long, but this has come in our life, and now we're together and we're talking and we're thinking and we're praying and we're strategizing, and it's an invitation into freedom, into passion. It's not an invitation.
That's why, by the way, the financial part is so key, because when you're you're trying to keep all your stuff. Mm-hmm. The movement into freedom is to start going, oh, let's go, let's give this a shot. And you literally start banding together with community members going, we got to try to fund this basketball league or whatever it is.
Yeah. Which everyone understands when it's personal. Yeah. When your daughter almost died last year, the $27,000 per blood transfusion or whatever it was, right? Is that those numbers are accurate?
It's 50
grand per treatment, which is about a 4 to 6 hour treatment.
Good John's face.
wasn't even a thought of, oh, well,
yeah.
No, it was, we'll figure it out. It doesn't matter. When Ryan needed hundreds of thousands of dollars see, that's the thing. It always makes sense when it's personal. And I think what this moment was Jesus inviting us to make hell personal.
That's exactly right.
This is
Truly.
us. And look, this is what makes a lot of people ask me this question, like in different kind of philosophical, ideological circles that I find myself in. What makes your religion or Christianity different? And a lot of people will give the mountain illustration, like our God came down from the mountain to get us. But I think this is another really interesting one. Whereas most gods call us to make our way up the mountain to him. But most religious ideas and ideologies are about building walls to protect our people from something else. Jesus called us to go to storm the other wall, to go into the pain and to take what we describe as kingdom into that, or you know, better known as love. So the practical is just asking the question, where is hell? That's all I want to know. I'm not, these guys, if there's shame or guilt or I'm not doing enough, then we've missed
I like the freedom.
the message of Jesus. There's no message of shame or guilt or I'm not doing enough. I think Dr. Fitch said last week, or we'll just call him Fitch, right?
Yep.
He said, God does not coerce us. I loved that statement. That statement has like sat with me for a week. He's not a coercive father. He just invites us. So this isn't a coercive moment of you better storm the gates of hell. It's more of an invitation, again, not a line in the sand, a knock at the door. If you remember that conversation of, this is where I want you. I want you right at the gate of hell, if not inside the gate, finding home there. The question for you is, for all of us, is where is hell in my context? And how do we take small steps towards that?
So,
Oh, go ahead.
Johnny, I think we got to title this one, The Church Needs to Go to Hell. That's the title. Church needs to go to hell. People are going to be mad, right, when they see it. Hopefully they can hang for an hour and hear this out. But,
you know, I thought of this quote that I love and I pulled it up while we were talking, because we were talking about, because basically wherever you're at, that invitation is going to take courage, right? Whether it's just like, means like entering into the pain of your neighbor, talking, you know, entering into like some darker place in your city, wherever you see hell, it takes courage. And I do think the like equation, like tying that to faith, recognizing it takes faith, courage takes faith, reminded me of this quote. And actually what made me think of it was when you talk about tonight we dine in hell. But this is from one of my favorite authors, G.K. Chesterton.
Hold on, don't forget, say the whole thing, because eat a hearty breakfast, men.
Eat a hearty breakfast.
For tonight we dine in hell.
So the this is from G.K. Chesterton. He wrote a book called Orthodoxy, which I'm in love with. It's so good. But let me just read you this. I think this will be a great quote to end on. Take the case of courage. No quality has ever so much addled the brains and tangled the definitions of merely rational sages. Courage is almost a contradiction in terms. It means a strong desire to live, taking the form of a readiness to die. He that will lose his life, the same shall save it, is not a piece of mysticism for saints or heroes. It is a piece of everyday advice for sailors or mountaineers. It might be printed in an alpine guide or a drill book. This paradox is the whole principle of courage, even of quite earthly and brutal courage. A man cut off by the sea may save his life if he will risk it on the precipice. He can only get away from death by continually stepping within an inch of it. A soldier surrounded by enemies, if he is to cut his way out, needs to combine a strong desire for living with a strange carelessness about dying. He must not merely cling to life, for then he will be a coward and he will not escape. He must not merely wait for death, for then he will be a suicide and will not escape. He must seek his life with a furious indifference to it. He must desire life like water and yet drink death like wine. No philosopher, I fancy, has ever expressed this romantic riddle with adequate lucidity, and I certainly have not done so, but Christianity has done more. It has marked the limits with its awful graves of the suicide and the hero, showing the distance between him who dies for the sake of living and him who dies for the sake of dying.
Bro, you're like that dude that hangs with Joe Rogan now. You just find some serious stuff right in the middle of when we're talking about it. You had your moment today, John, and then you
This is
finished it
my
up with a
moment.
moment. Like, awesome. All right, church needs to go to hell.
Go to hell, y'all.